All right, guys. So, in developing this week's prompt, which is how does music reflect culture? I thought a lot about our conversation at the end of last week, and kind of all of our own personal experiences with music, and sort of what it says about. I thought about, I don't know, kind of all of our personal histories and how music might have played a role in that. And so I remember, like, many of us played or many of us, I guess not including me, but like they were like forced by their parents to take piano lessons, right? And they learned piano as a kid. Um, and so, like, in contrast, there's me and David who were a part of band, and part of like that sort of music culture. And I believe Justin, he like plays the guitar, and so I think that was more of like an individual undertaking. But yeah, I was thinking, like, I don't know, it just like thinking about all these different personal histories. Like, the first thing that comes to mind with Asian parents making you learn piano, it kind of makes me think that, like, maybe, I don't know, in the like Asian mindset, like you learn music or you learn an instrument sort of like as a discipline, and it's supposed to teach you discipline, right? And like it's almost a way to discipline your kid, right? Like, it's like your parents want you to learn music, and they kind of force you to take these like rigorous lessons. And oftentimes there's little like individual say in the matter. um, like, I didn't learn to play the piano. My dad had me learn to play the guitar, and it was super random, and it was just like something, he thought it'd be good for me, and he just kind of made me do it. And I didn't particularly enjoy it, and then I stopped learning after like half a year. And it was just like, well, I don't know, it was like kind of a waste of money and time. I thought that, like, I mean, we spent so much money on the guitar and these lessons, and I never really enjoyed it, and there wasn't really any say on my part. But I mean, we mentioned Alan. Alan mentioned last week that, like, he never wanted to play the piano, and his parents made it, but then he's definitely going to make his kids play, right? As if it's some never-ending cycle. But then, like, on the flip side of that, like, there's also, so I mean, David and I, we were in high school band, and that was more of an independent decision. But I also think, like, there's this culture to band, right? Like, maybe nerd culture, right? The band geeks or whatnot. But I think there's like there's something to be said about the the culture and like the personal identities that can be formed out of band. Yeah, I mean, we there was definitely, like, it could be thought of as almost a little bit cultish, right? But, like, many friend groups were kind of formed out of band, and it was like kind of a big part of the social structure, I think, of any high school. And so I don't know, those are kind of the ways that I thought about how music might reflect on a person's identity or on a person's culture. Um, and yeah, that's kind of like the personal mindset. But I also wanted to bring this conversation to maybe broader ideas about how music might impact a culture or a people, and how it might reflect on the development of a culture. So
Yeah,
that's my beginning. But
do you think the AE was do you think the prompt might make a little more sense to say, like, what does music mean to you? Just because it's like, how much of a view do any of us really have on what it means to culture? But I think each of us could speak a lot to what we've seen, like, for each of our lives, right? Or our lives of people around us.
yeah,
Well, I think I like the way that Osmond framed the question because I think culture is the word that carries the weight here, really. Like, what I want to talk about, I guess, in part of this is like this culture, and it is a culture of like middle and upper middle class people taking music lessons or forcing their kids to take music lessons. That's like a thing, right? It's a thing in this country, and there's some reason that it happens, right? It's not that all of these individual people like have their own individual expectations. They're doing so based on like a cultural foundation, right? This
Yeah.
expectation that your kids need to take music lessons. So what is the root of that, you know?
I mean, I think that's my hot take on why Asian parents, at least Chinese parents, always have their kids do it, right? They, like, what kind of names do they give their kids, right? Like Kevin, Walter, Alan, like old white dude names from like middle upper class societies or classes that they knew, and they're like, oh, all these kids played violin, they played piano, they had like rich old white piano teachers. That's how my piano teacher was. And
Yeah.
they're like, hey, if I name them like this, if I make them play instruments, I make them get hella good grades, go to hella good schools, they'll be in a better spot than I was.
So
I
you
just think
think
it's
it's a way?
interesting.
Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting. Like, it's certain instruments that kind of evoke the upper class smart kid image, right? And I want to figure out, what was the cultural development of this? Because I feel like it's not really a stereotype for white kids who I guess the Asian parents are trying to emulate for them to play instruments, right? It's a culture of immigrant parents that seem to be pushing this sort of narrative, right?
Hmm. Could it be like colonial in some sense? Like,
I guess. I don't know. I just think it's odd.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
because-
So
it's an attempt by like, East Asian countries to be more Western. Like,
Is it a form of assimilation?
yeah,
Is
I
it-
mean 100%, right? Like
Yeah.
Eastern Asian, at least Chinese parents, like are way more into assimilation than like South Asian parents, right? Like, I don't watch any Asian films. Can barely speak Chinese now. My name's Alan. We're talking to Osmond and Oreo, you know.
So why is it like the piano and the violin that are always singled out, while the guitar, kind of in the way Osmond you described it, is more of like the individual's instrument?
Dude, it's too low class. That's why they don't see like you don't. I feel like you just don't pay as much money and invest as much into like the guitar, right? I think it's kind of the
Yeah.
same thing with band. Like maybe the cost of entry. I don't know. I can't speak to it, but maybe the cost of entry is lower than buying an entire piano and buying a nice violin plus violin teachers.
Guitar is not a classical instrument.
I mean, it can be used in a classical context. There's a lot of
It is not.
classical guitar. Well, I mean, maybe not in like terms of an orchestra, no.
Well, so that's kind of what I was thinking is might be the distinction, right? So there's a much longer history of composition that kind of surrounds the piano as an instrument, right? There are all those famous classical songs, right? Same with violin. It just has a longer documented history than a guitar does, which it's a very it has a very different role in music, right? It doesn't go as far back as far as documentation goes, but it's very prominent in popular music, kind of in the recent history and like even 100 years ago, right? But it doesn't go too much further back, right? Beyond that, it's just minstrels and stuff like that. It's very, as Alan was saying, low class. So
Low class.
Minstrel. I haven't heard that word in a while.
So is like the Asian parent stereotype of putting your kids in music school, is this all just kind of like, the effort is to create an image, right? Your kid is smart. They know how to play at least
Yeah.
one instrument. You have a piano in your house, which is an instrument that takes up a lot of room, is made of fancy wood and costs thousands of dollars.
And
Yeah.
will easily be heard during the parties when there's a lull, and they'll say, "Oh, look at these trophies!" Like I don't know about y'all, but I had all my music trophies stacked on my piano. Then every time there's a lull, they're like, "Play something, play something, show them what we spent thousands of dollars."
I'm
training you to
guessing there
do."
was even like a dedicated room in your house where all of this stuff was stored, right?
Well, in like the nicer houses, yeah. In my house, we have like a hallway, and my piano is like
Still.
in that hallway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because my house, we had like a room at the front. We called it the music room. We never used it for anything. Never spent any time in it, but that's where the piano was, and it was just like a showpiece.
Yeah, 100%, right?
It's just
and,
kind of
and
like-
you would be a part of the showpiece.
Is this like part of the American dream now? Is like having your kid know an instrument and own a piano? Is this like an aspiration that people are working towards?
Yeah, and it's a happy coincidence that it happens to promote cognitive development and make you a little smarter.
Yeah, I mean, we can even question whether it really does much of that, because I feel like when I took piano lessons, which was for years as a kid, probably my parents easily spent thousands of dollars on these piano lessons. I feel like I didn't learn a thing. I don't know. I'm not sure how it affected like my cognitive ability, right, or my performance in school. I'll never be able to prove that. But I don't know how to play the piano today.
Yeah, I mean, either.
Get any lasting skill out of it. It just makes me wonder, was it all for show? Was it just some like a form of babysitting, so my parents could have another free hour or two.
Well, just think how much dumber you would be today if you had just never played it, right? Like,
But I don't
like,
know, right? Like I didn't take away anything from it really. It's a thing that I went to after school, and it was kind of
come
like,
on, dude. You must have like after those piano concerts or recitals, like you must have had all the bitches coming. Everyone's like, "Oh God,
oh, okay,
play it in
totally.
D major." Oh God.
So Justin, when did you start learning to play the guitar?
That's a good question. I guess I started picking up guitar when I was a teenager. Probably say maybe early high school or late middle school. So that was definitely independent of my piano lessons and my involvement with the piano. Piano was the first instrument I learned, and that went on for a few years, but I was never like invested in it. Kind of like you, I didn't enjoy it, right? I just went to these lessons because my mom wanted me to, and they were paying for it. But the guitar is something I picked up myself just because I listened to a lot of guitar-based music, and I really identified, I guess, with the, you know, rock stars and celebrities I looked up to when I was a
You
kid.
are a rock star.
Oh, thanks.
Of course.
Yeah, I wonder why like we take all these lessons. I mean, 3 out of 4 of us took piano lessons, but like as far as like contemporary music goes, I feel like piano is not as prevalent as say guitar, or like just what modern music looks like isn't necessarily focused or centered around the piano like it was maybe in, I don't know, the 1700s or the 1800s when classical music was being formed. And
It can
so,
look pretty like great in a performance too. Like remember Andrew McMahon when he was like literally dancing on the piano keys?
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like I find it interesting that there's this like sort of obsession, is when you have a student learn music, it's typically it has to be like classical music. They have to be classically trained.
The key word is class. Class.
Well, I think with the piano, like there's something appealing about like its inherent complexity, right? Like it has all of these keys. You look at a piano, I'm like, wow, that looks complicated because it has so
And it
many
looks
keys.
beautiful. It looks beautiful, right? Like you look at a nice like Yamaha, it's like spread out, its wing is like up cocked up there. And can you imagine like you go to the Lee family, right? And they have a beautiful like $15,000 Yamaha, right? Like maybe more. And then their kids playing beautiful music on it. It's shining and shimmering in the middle of the music room, which has light flowing through it. And then you go to the Wen family, right? And their kid wheels out his fucking marimba, and he's like, do 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 do, like you would never go to another Asian party, right? It's over. Like there's no class in that instrument.
But I mean, like I do really think like the people think that playing the piano requires a higher level of intellectual effort because it has so many keys and it requires a lot of dexterity and precision to press them correctly, right? With like a stringed instrument like the guitar, a lot of guitar music is chord based. You only have to learn like a few bass chords to really know how to play the guitar. Any pop song
Wait, really?
like 4 chords, right?
Wait, actually? Is it that easy?
I mean, if you want to like learn to sing along to your favorites like top 40 radio song, you only need to learn the bass major chords and minor chords, right? You don't need to know like any fancy finger picking techniques or how to like do a guitar solo. You could just play the chords and you could get like 90% there, right? But with the piano, like the compositions people are learning are obviously more complex, right? When you go and take piano lessons, you're learning all this classical music, which is these complicated melodies, and you learn how to read sheet music, which itself is like a barrier to entry in its own language that a lot of people don't find accessible. And then you're learning to operate this huge instrument that has like a billion keys, and they all sound different, and you have to know how to navigate up and down. I think the piano just looks like an instrument that requires complexity. It's like piloting a plane and sitting in the cockpit versus driving a car,
So outside of the piano, here's an interesting thing I heard a while back. Back in the like our parents' day, or even like a little younger than that, you'd hear like top 40 radio or pop radio, and you during a time, and you like it'd play over and over again, and it'd cycle out, right? So it'd be like the summer of like 1981. There'd be a song that would play constantly for a few months, and it'd cycle out, and then every time you heard that song, like over the next 10, 20, 30 years, you get brought back to the summer of 1981 and whatever you were doing then, right? And it would like evoke a lot of I think emotional response, right? But the comparison is now that we have all our music at our fingertips, right? Like we have Spotify, iTunes, whatever. You don't really learn to associate that music with that time or that memory. And so when you listen in the future, it's like disattached and it's like almost like an experience that we're missing out on. And when I heard that, I kind of thought about it and it's like, yeah, music is different, like pre-Spotify and when I had my own library and listened to the radio a bunch. Like I'll listen to things I listened to like early in high school, like huge amounts of memory, things I picked up in like college, like after that area of high school, now not really tied to any particular memory. Unless you play it like on repeat, right? Like which Ozzy and I sometimes do.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I mean, what do you guys think of that?
The thing this first reminds me of is just maybe the development of social media. And I mean, we can like, I don't know, maybe draw, kind of a big assumption here, right? But like social media, you might say has like more shallow interactions, and then like kind of the memories that you try to put onto social media, and like you like I don't know, have your own life in social media that really, in some sense you might say like doesn't really mean too much. And so just a general sense of shallowness. I wonder if it is connected to that. The shallowness of how we listen to music now. I mean, I've never heard that, like, I haven't heard this idea that, like, now that, with things like Spotify, music is perhaps less emotionally salient. I don't know. Have you guys experienced that? I don't know if I have. I guess because I listen to music on repeat. But,
well, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go first. Don't have a fully formed idea yet anyways.
Okay, well, I guess I'll play devil's advocate. I would disagree that it's less meaningful these days. I agree that like the music we listen to as individuals is disassociated from the year it was produced, right? Like I listen to a lot of music that wasn't made in the past year, and all of us are kind of building playlists that cobble together all these different eras of popular music and decades and just put it all in one, right? So that's true. But I don't think that makes it less meaningful because, as an individual, when you're listening to music, you form like an emotional connection with it and your music taste evolves over time, right? So like I could like listen to a particular album. It might have been made in the 1990s, but I listened to it a lot at a particular time in my life and I'll associate it with that time of my life independently of when it was made, right? So I could like still chart out, different phases of my life and the types of music I was listening to that accompanied each phase. And even though that music wasn't produced at that time, it still holds an association, So I think the great thing about Spotify and like this liberalization of music and having it accessible instantly is that people are now able to kind of form these emotional attachments with a much larger array and volume of music, right? And that's a great thing. Like it's more than just you being limited to whatever records you can afford to buy and then whatever they're playing on the radio for free. Now it's like the number of connections and number of experiences you can have in music are basically limitless, and I think that's a positive thing for society and music.
So the way you've described music kind of between the three of you, it almost makes it feel to me as though the music itself doesn't inherently evoke any sort of feeling, emotional or otherwise. It's the way Alan kind of described it is kind of like, absent this association with a particular period of my life, which is the ultimate source of nostalgia or whatever emotional feeling there is, the song itself doesn't inherently generate any of that, which is a different experience for me, because I usually listen to songs, like I will have a song in mind when how do I put it? I try to motivate myself sometimes by listening to certain pieces of music, or if I'm feeling a particular way, I try to pick a song out of my library that complements that kind of emotional state, or if I kind of want to transition I kind of use that as a tool to help manage this set of things. So I don't feel that there's any lack of emotional connection to the songs that I listen to, because I listen to the song for that emotional response. So I've never had that situation where I listen to songs on the radio anyway, so I can't do a comparison, but I don't see, kind of from my perspective, a decrease in value of the music just because like it's not associated with a particular time period.
It's like you're emotionally programming yourself.
Yeah, it's like an
Kevin needs to
active
feel
management.
motivated. Fire Emblem.
Something like that, right? So yeah, like that's how my relationship with my library more or less. Now it's not always actively managed. I'm just saying that sometimes it does play that role for me. So it like when you kind of describe this idea that now the songs are like less meaningful from an emotional standpoint, perhaps because it's not associated with a particular period of your life. That's just not something that I can relate to.
Right. Well, okay. So, two things. One, painful breakup songs. Do y'all have songs like 2 or 3? Like, there's a lot of painful breakup songs, but for your particular painful breakup, do you have some that in your head, like every time you hear it, you're like, oh, this brings me back to like the emotional pain. It like rips your heart out because it like takes you back to when you were like listening to it over and over. Because last time I had one was like 9 years ago or something, right? Like I don't know when, 10 years ago, and it still hurts. I hear it, and I'm like, oh, I'm so alone. Everyone hates me, you know. And that's what I'm thinking of, because like at the time you had like few hundred songs on your phone, and only like Kevin said, like 10 of them would match your mood. And you just play those over and over, and you like condition yourself to hate yourself while you listen to it.
Well, I can't say that I have any breakup songs that come to mind. I guess, I don't know, maybe that's just not how I dealt with those breakups. But as far as like a song taking me back 9 years, I've recently been playing like all region etudes on my marimba. And it's really, I don't know, I feel like it's sort of a time machine for me. Just like I play it and then I just think, oh, fuck. I play it and I just think about like all of my high school memories and all the things that I was going through as I was first learning this piece of music, right? And like, I don't know, some of the music it's not great, right? It's not like I would go out of my way to listen to it. It's just that like, yeah, there is, kind of in contrast to what Kevin was doing, or Kevin was saying, it's I think, it's me, like when the music and like the environment that I was in and like the time that I was in, it really that's kind of how I derive meaning to that music. But I would also say that like that's not the only like kind of, that's not the only my only relationship with music. There's like plenty of songs out there, I'd say, that like evoke maybe a visceral reaction out of me. Like I hear a song and I like instantly love it. I instantly know that this is like a song I want to keep listening to, or it makes me feel a certain way. And so I think in that respect, I do sometimes enjoy music for what it is, right? But then other times music also has meaning just because of, its impact on my life and the memories that it evokes of a past life even. Yeah, I guess a little bit of both is kind of what I was going for with this answer in response to what Kevin was saying.
Okay. Yeah, I think, something I've been wondering about, like, is the relationship between, discovering new music and music that evokes like an instant reaction out of you based on the musicality of it versus music that you listen to for nostalgia, right? I'm kind of wondering, like, as you get older, and I don't know, I'm wondering if you guys have experienced this, has the volume of music that you listen to that represents one of those characteristics versus the other changed? Because I feel like as I get older, I started to recycle music more, right? I listen to old music and artists that I know really well, and I just kind of like cycle through them throughout the year. I'll be really into this one artist that I've been listening to since high school, and then I'll shift over to this other one that I've also been listening to since high school. And I'm like having a harder time discovering new music and staying on top of trends in music. And I feel like that's like something that happens to a lot of people as they get older, is that they kind of fall out of sync. Yeah, right. I mean, that might be a factor, but is it also because maybe as we get older, we're less willing to discover new things, or we just kind of like, people view their youth as their glory days, so you kind of get trapped and like always listening to, you know, this music from periods of your life where you were, you know, carefree and your parents paid for everything and you were happy, you know, or working a job or in a stressful graduate degree or something. You know, I'm kind of wondering how that changes over time.
I mean, I don't know if that's really changed for me yet. And I think, you know, we'll probably figure it out more in the coming decades rather than early 20s. But I think like before it used to, like, you have to go through effort to find new music, right? Even like 10 years ago, it was not easy to discover new music. You just like turn on Pandora. You're like, oh, I hope Pandora does something interesting, but it was like the same few hundred like playlists, even if it was called radio, right? And then Spotify, like the release radar, the like whatever, explore something new. I think it's really good about that.
Sure. Yeah.
But I do think on the flip side, like, do you guys ever play that game where you play a song and a first person to guess the name and like artist of the song wins and you do points or whatever? Basically just like you can sometimes you can hear the first like note of a song and someone will get it, right? And that's when it's like really fun. It's really good with Taylor Swift songs. But what I've noticed is for most people our age, the songs they tend to be best at that with, outside of maybe the few artists that they really love, and even then, it is like the time period in like the 2010s, late 2000s. You know, and I think that's because those were the times when you torrent songs a lot. You'd go on iTunes, you'd select different songs and albums, and you'd look at your iPhone or your iPod, and it would show like name of the song, album name, artist name, and it kind of like teaches that in your memory. But now you just put shuffle on a massive Spotify playlist. You have no idea what's in it, and it plays all these songs. You're like, I like it. You go back on, you click like, and you don't look at it again. And so I find people terrible at learning names and details of songs now.
Well, no, is that because like when we were teenagers in the late 2000s and early 2010s, like that's when we were the most emotionally attached to music. That's like when the time period when we had the most time to listen to music, and our hormones led us to really being invested in certain types of music? Or is it because of the technology? I don't know. I think it's more because we were teenagers.
Yeah,
I think it's a little
would agree
A.
with that.
Little
It's
B.
like middle school. You know, it's middle school and high school, and so like we might feel like we have ownership over like that time period. Like this is our music, the music of our generation.
Yeah.
And
so does that mean like we're predisposed to just like caring less about music as we get older, and suddenly we'll be in our 40s and we'll not know like what the kids are listening to these days, and we'll think it's like obscene and terrible?
Well, they'll only
just
be
our
listening
fate?
to it. They'll only be listening to it in VR, so we're not going to know anyway. We'll be like, why is everyone living their lives entirely in those pods?
yeah, I don't know. You know, when Justin first, you know, brought this up, I was thinking that like I feel like my relationship with music has only just started to like I just got Spotify Premium like last year.
Congrats.
And so I feel like I'm only now starting to really like discover music. I mean, before I would like listen to the radio. I mean, you know, you hear things at like parties or whatever, and then like I mean, I just get a general sense of like what's going on in music, and there's like sort of songs that I like, but I don't know. I feel like only recently have I started to develop a library of music.
Ozzy, have you listened to Judah and the Lion more?
I'm not. I don't.
I think you'd like them.
Okay, sure. I'll check them out. Yeah, I don't know. There's, I guess, you know, there's always ways to like maybe keep your music tastes fresh. I guess you've probably, you know, been on Spotify Premium for so long. And yeah, I guess I've always thought in my head that like.
Only like a year for me, at least. Like not coming up on a year.
Oh, I was talking to Justin.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
I feel like
Justin's
Justin's relationship with like, I don't know, his relationship with his library of music, I feel like is very mature, right? Like I feel like it's something that he's like kind of been crafting since, you know, high school or middle school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, yeah, I think it's interesting because for you, I've noticed you, Osman, haven't had a very deep relationship with music, but your relationship with movies is much deeper than mine.
Right.
I'm kind of wondering.
So what do you guys mean by like the deep relationship with movies or music?
Well, for me, it's like, you know, I spend a lot of time thinking about the music I listen to. Like I put a lot of effort into crafting playlists. I probably have like 100 different Spotify playlists, and they're all categorized, and they're like, I have playlists for different emotions and different decades and different artists, you know. I spend a lot of time researching music. So I have this website I visit a lot called rateyourmusic.com, which is kind of like this huge music review website where it's all like very neatly organized and cataloged, and they like users score like albums and artists, and they have like these huge rankings where like you can like look at what was the best country album in 1999, and you can find it, right? According to thousands of people on the internet. So like I put a lot of effort and a lot of time into like trying to find music that I would enjoy and really getting to know it, looking at lyrics and analyzing them. And I'm sure like with movies, it's kind of like a movie buff, you know, who like has watched all the Tarantino films and goes back and watches them again and watches the director's cut and watches the deleted scenes, you know. It's like having that depth of involvement beyond just like consuming it once, you know.
Yeah, this is a distinction we've talked about before. Yeah, maybe I don't know if my love of movies is actually like as far as your love of music.
Yeah, that's intense, bro.
I feel like Alan's much more of a
mean,
movie guy than I am.
No, I just like mainstream shit. I'm the definition of like a pop music lover, but for movies. Like insert Marvel into my bloodstream all day, you know.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, just the distinction you're drawing here, Justin, just makes me try to think back to the prompt. And I mean, what about our personal identities or our cultures kind of like would reflect on that difference? And I don't know. I mean, I just feel like maybe my parents, they weren't really people to like put on music around the house. Like I don't know, my mom always wanted to like have speakers in the house so that we could play music, but my dad never did it for her. And I recently got them a speaker as like
nice.
Yeah,
very considerate.
Yeah, it's like it was a gift that's like 20 years in the making, honestly, because it was something that like,
his whole life you've heard the conflict. Why won't you get me speakers? I'll do it next year.
It was like my mom, like when they first moved into this big house in Texas, that's something that my mom really wanted, right? Like kind of like maybe like some speaker system that we could like all listen to music together, right? Kind of throughout the house. But it never happened. And so,
you know, they say better late than never, right?
Yeah. So certainly like growing up, I just, music just wasn't really as like, it wasn't really a part of my life. It was maybe like when I started playing my own instrument in high school that I started to like really develop a relationship with it. But then when I went to college, I stopped playing my instrument. And I feel like the next big moment for me was getting Spotify Premium, as far as really like, you know, building a relationship with music.
Do you feel like before you got Spotify Premium, like that the ad music is the most irritating ad music or sounds that you could possibly imagine? Like I swear at one point they were running like a buzzsaw. They'd be like, get Spotify Premium.
I mean, it's certainly intentional, right? Like,
Yeah.
The ads aren't supposed to be pleasant
annoying.
sounding. They don't. Like you're not supposed to want to hear more of them, right?
But it can't be annoying enough to drive you from the platform, right? So it's just that like they teeter the line of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think music. My parents, I don't think they were necessarily the source of my interests. I don't know. I think it's an interesting question because my parents aren't like music aficionados. My dad like introduced me to like some classic rock, but it wasn't like a huge component of our relationship or something. So I don't know. I feel like I definitely used music as a form of escape, especially in like middle school, you know, turbulent period or whatever. And
Yeah.
like for me, like when it comes to like celebrity culture or celebrity worship, it's musicians who I usually identify the strongest with. You know, I always looked up to certain artists and the kind of style and the message that they were trying to give off, you know. And that's, I guess, when I indulged in art, you know, consumed art and media, that's always what I was focused on. And that's where like I kind of formed my identity.
You think any of them took piano lessons as a kid?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just like any other middle class family makes their kids do. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that is really like, you know, key to their development as musicians. I feel like I don't know, so many of those artists are, you know, indie and they like kind of develop their music in their own way. But I mean, becoming like a classically trained pianist, like I question how useful it is. I mean, it sounds like many of us, the lessons that we took back in elementary school to learn these instruments was really just useless, right? And so I don't know, who is it useful for? Why do we even have them?
It's useful for dinner parties.
Have you? I know you've all mentioned some exposure with the actual playing of the instruments, but have any of you taken any music theory lessons?
Oh God, yeah. Every year we'd have a music theory section, and we'd all have to pass some standardized test
Test,
for it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, my experience with that is learning the music theory has been more of a segue between those lessons with my exposure to music in general now than the actual playing of the instrument. Because, and I still have my doubts, but when I first took the music theory lessons, the instructor gave a big spiel about why should you care, like why is this important, and it was just trying to say what you learn specifically here, you won't be able to, might not necessarily see immediately what is useful about it, but after a while, if you start thinking about the popular songs you listen to carefully and with the same mindset, you'll notice that kind of music hasn't developed very far from these theory roots that I'm about to teach you, right? It's, as Justin was saying, like all the popular songs, like with the guitar, you just learn the chords, right? It's just those chords going over and over again, right? That's kind of like the gist of the song, right? And kind of in that way, that's why I feel like, you might have this impression that piano is more complex. Like there's inherently two parts to the part, right? There's the chords part, which you usually do with your left hand, and then there's the melody, right? So a lot of times when people say like a classical piece is very sophisticated, beautiful, well composed, it's very complex in that way, right? But a lot of the core baseline things it's common to all the music, and it's being built upon it.
So do you think that's that mindset is sort of rooted in like Western civilizations? Like music theory, as we study it, it's a Western product, right? This major key, minor keys, A through G. Different cultures, different civilizations have likely formed music theory in some other way, right? I mean, I'm not super educated on the fact, but I would imagine that African music is probably not based on the same like chordal structure that maybe Western music is based on.
Definitely.
I was wondering what you guys thought about. We think that this is what music is. It's the music. It's a theory of music as if it's so central to what music is, and it's really, I think, just like a product of Western civilization, right?
100% agree. And I think, if it's not fair to call it a theory of music in the same way you might describe like a theory of chemistry or physics. It's not inherent, right? Because music is kind of a product of our creations. I do feel it's still a suitable name in this case, just because of the prevalence of what we're going to call Western music here, right? Like it's just so common. So if you have a consistent framework to understanding even what is technically a subset of all possible music, it still covers such a broad variety of songs that it is still very useful.
Well, so let's say when we think about really broad concepts like rhythm or melody, or I don't know, like pitch, right? Let's say we have some aliens, right? And if you look at the comparison between math and music, aliens came to us from a totally different part of the universe or galaxy. Look like nothing like how we could compose or imagine life to be like. Number one, would they have a different mathematics system? Or would they just have a different way of representing what we know to be our math? Well, like when they design their spaceships or whatever they're doing, they would be operating under the same laws of mathematics, right? The same, right? Like a squared plus b squared is not going to equal like c squared plus 1 or something, right? It's going to be the same shit, right? So if they had music, do they have rhythm? Do they have pitch? Do they have melodies? Right? It's like completely like fucked up? Like, is banging pots and pans randomly going to sound good to them, or is it going to be like, no, good? Like, there's still some theory there that's just inherent to how sound is.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I think parts of music theory are like internationally relevant beyond like just Western music, because there are like concepts within music that I think all humans can agree upon, right? Like a major chord sounds happy. And I think people in every culture would generally agree with
Well,
that
you got
statement.
one naysayer here.
Maybe-
I've never understood why they said one was happy and one was sad. I'm just like,
All right,
this
you
sounds.
should go to a fucking doctor then. It just sounds happy, bro.
But I think that there's a greater point that like a lot of cultures borrow musical traditions from other cultures, right? And even like a lot of popular Western musicians and like pop music these days borrows tidbits from, you know, Indian music or East Asian music and those traditions, right? So there's like a universal language of it that has been kind of shipped around and transformed throughout history, right?
Mhm.
Like I do think the Western tradition of music is unique in its use of like 4/4 time and like especially in popular music, you know, a certain backbeat, a certain style of melody, certain chord arrangements, you know, that we find in like rock and pop music all the time. But there are other things that, you know, are translatable, other concepts that are shipped around. So, you know, it's like a mix. But I think the music theory in general, you shouldn't just refer to it under like a Western framework. I think,
Or within a galactic framework.
yeah, like parts of it are relevant to, you know, just the relationship between different sounds and notes. That's like more scientifically based, right? Because we're at some level, we're just talking about sound wave frequencies, and you know, some pairings of those will sound different than
Can
others. And
you imagine these like gray egg-headed aliens coming down singing All Star? Justin's losing his mind.
yeah,
The
so then
laws
I'd
of
like
music are the same.
like aliens might have a different idea of what sounds good, but we all do know that, you know, there's a scientific basis for sound, right? Sound comes from sound waves, and it's like they have relationships. They're like
To each other,
physical
right? There's some
physical
that,
representations
yeah.
of relationships between notes and things like that that all of us are working under, right?
Mm.
Convoluted way of saying we're all like kind of beholden to the laws of physics, and we might disagree on what different music should sound like or what sounds good, and different traditions might have different ideas of what a major chord is, whether it's happy or sad, right? But at the end of the day, there's a relationship between notes, right? There are notes.
So, in my view, theories are just ways of thinking to help you better understand something. So, I think a fair way to assess the relevance of music theory at large is how often can utilizing concepts established by music theory assist you with deconstructing any given piece of music. Like Justin alluded to a point earlier that it's kind of unique in the whole time signature and like major keys and whatnot. I feel like that's more just a product of it was a very successful and well preserved way of looking at music that kind of survived to this day, where no counterpart from a couple hundred years back kind of managed to stay alive in that same way. But kind of to its credit, I think most forms of music, wherever it might be from, you can kind of borrow the tools you kind of establish in music theory in this Western sense, and you can use it to analyze the piece and come to a better technical understanding of how the piece is constructed. So I think there's kind of an inherent value there.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, is that like, you know, sheet notation has usefulness beyond Western music, right? You could take any piece of music or even complete silence and deconstruct it into sheet music, right? And that would be legible to anyone else who understands it. But like some of the higher concepts in music theory, like chord progressions or what sounds right, you know, what a good melody sounds like, that's obviously subjective and culturally determined. Yeah.
Yep.
So one thing that came to mind that I wanted to talk about for maybe the last 10 minutes here, Justin brought up something about Western music, or maybe it doesn't have to be Western music necessarily, but you know, the borrowing of music from other cultures. So he mentioned like you might put in like something that sounds like Indian music, or maybe something that's more a little relevant to us. Like there's this idea of the like the cultural appropriation of the music of African Americans, right? Like how rap might be something that was like kind of uniquely theirs is starting to become borrowed by white America. And I guess, you know, when you say the words cultural appropriation, I feel like it's just instantly negative, the connotation, right? Like it's like one culture trying to like take something from another culture and make it their own. And so, I mean, Justin mentioned the whole borrowing of music in, I think, a more positive light. But I guess I wanted to hear what you guys thought about maybe framing it as cultural appropriation instead of cultural borrowing, and what kind of the distinction is.
I don't like this idea of cultural appropriation. I think it's very isolationist. It's trying to draw unnecessary distinctions, right? It's kind of like someone has to own this thing. Like we can give credit to like where it originated from, right? But especially for something like music, like if you can use it somewhere else and like it serves its purpose as music, and right, like it's like saying I was the first guy to invent guac, and so y'all can't eat guac, otherwise you're culturally appropriate. It's like, I mean, even if like, because I don't think anyone who eats guac later who's not the inventor is kind of doing it with the mindset. It's like, see, he made this thing and he thought it was his, but now it's mine too. You know, it's like, it's something you can share. So like, you don't lose out when someone else kind of shares it, right?
Yeah,
So
but I think there is, I agree. I think culture is by and large, like not something that, it's not like a zero sum game, right? You share it and it increases, right? Like it's extra good when people share it. But I think we all know there's a difference between like, maybe you do really care about learning about Native American history, and let's say you wear a headdress or you build your own headdress and like something you're passionate about and you try to do it in a respectful manner, and people who use it like to market casinos or use it to, I mean, which are often run by Native Americans, but like, you know, maybe use it in just a capitalistic fashion, right? Or a racist way, right? Like you look at like fucking Peter Pan, movie has not aged well, like holy shit. But yeah, like especially with hindsight, you're like, wow, the way they used those aspects of their culture was obviously not super respectful. But yeah, I mean, right, there's a clear difference between the two examples, right? And it's same with like anything, right? Like if you see like I don't know, white people wearing like traditional Asian clothes and they just really like it, it's like, oh cool, you know, no harm done. But then people turn it into like some stripper outfit, and like the strippers like it and they don't think it's disrespectful, but we do. It's like, I don't think the appropriation's real. I think people just use it as a way to separate, oh, this is the sharing of culture I like and this is the sharing of culture I don't like, right? Like,
well, I don't know, I think
like
you're
you're
kind
right.
of, I think you're getting at what I think is the central problem that people are talking about cultural appropriation, which is like the imbalance in power and like wealth between the people who profit off of cultures and the people who don't, right? Like you could take the example like Elvis, you know, obviously everyone knows who Elvis is, super rich in his day, but he was strongly influenced by and borrowed much of his, you know, musical genre from Black artists in Mississippi where he grew up, right? And Memphis in Tennessee. And there's a good question, I think, of like the credit that was given, right? Because Elvis was the one who became instantly popular, super famous, well known around the US, and made millions and millions of dollars, you know, had a mansion and his own planes and stuff. And all of these Black artists in Mississippi who were pioneering that genre of music that he adopted and, you know, came into, did not get the same amount of credit, right? They did not get the riches and the glory and like the recognition of being pioneers of rock and roll like Elvis did. And I think that's the question, right? Is when people, particularly white people, take like these aspects of culture from other people and kind of get the credit as being the pioneers instead of the people who came before them.
Is the credit the most important thing?
that's
Or
what you're making
the
it
wealth,
sound like.
Credit both in like social
Like,
terms and economic
And to their bank
terms, right?
account.
Yes. Yeah. Because I mean, there's no question the Black artists who came before Elvis were poorer than Elvis. You know?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a fair
Yeah,
point.
there's an obvious reason for that. So But I agree, Kevin, that like generally, I think a lot of the hype about cultural appropriation is misplaced, right? Like, if, I decide to make a burrito as a white person, that is not like a bad thing, right? But if I decided to take, like, if I took Mexican cuisine and kind of like commodified it into like Taco Bell, for instance, and made billions of dollars off of something that I didn't, like an idea that I didn't come up with, I can see why some people would be offended by that.
It sounds like those people are just salty, though. It's
Yeah,
kind of
wait,
like,
people are gonna be like salty about everything, right? Like, what if I'm
Yeah,
Chinese?
yeah.
Like, aren't the people that made like a commodified Chinese product like Panda Express? Aren't they Chinese? Right?
Yeah,
Like, are they
maybe I should
culturally
clarify.
appropriating?
I don't agree with people who think that Panda Express or Taco Bell are like bad or forms of cultural appropriation that are bad. Um, I don't know. I think the Elvis example gets more to the heart of my argument here, and I'm having a hard time like kind of defining how it's different from those restaurants. You're muted.
Oh no, I was
Oh.
on y'all. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
uh,
But yeah, like I don't know what's the difference. Why is Elvis, for example, is he different than Taco Bell? In terms of this analogy.
the only time I can see why people get angry when aspects of culture are being borrowed is kind of once it's repackaged, it somehow degrades the original culture, right? So I don't know what Alan was referencing specifically about Peter Pan, but I imagine it's kind of the way the kids were dressed in a kind of a Native
Bro, it
American
wasn't
fashion.
the kids. They
Wasn't
they
the
had
kids?
straight up red people. Like the Indians were red people, and they were like, yeah. Oh God, let me find the song. It's even the name of the song is fucked.
It's so in some way kind of you slander the source. Like I feel like that's the only kind where I can empathize with the folks who are like, oh, you're doing cultural appropriation here. And it's like in the process of you sharing it, you kind of break it. It's like when you lend like your bike to someone, he returns it to you with both wheels flat, right? Like you can understandably be upset about that, right? If they kind of in the process of using it degrade the source, right? But I wouldn't call it cultural appropriation. Then I would call it something else, kind of more indicative of the problem, which is in the process of you using this thing that kind of you didn't come up with, by the way, you're destroying it, and and I think that's something to be sad about.
I think the tricky thing with intellectual property is that you're making copies of things. You're not like, unless you actually had the master file song or an art piece or something, and you literally deleted it. Anything that you make that's derivative is a copy and still exists. So it's not like destroying.
You're damaging it, right? You're damaging the cultural legacy potentially, right? So like in the red people example, right? It's like now what do people remember and know about the Native Americans? Well, they're just red people. It's like, well,
but that's because of the power imbalance, right? The imbalance between races is that the whites have all this cultural power and wealth, which allows them to redefine what red people means, right? So like I feel like the issue of cultural appropriation is inseparable from the issue of inequality, which is inseparable from the issue of race, right? They're all kind of linked together. And you can't really have what we would probably define as bad cultural appropriation without like one more powerful group kind of taking the cultural output of a weaker group and redefining it to their benefit.
Yeah, and I think you get to the heart of the issue really well. Like, but people's response isn't, oh, let's correct like the inherent power issues. It's more like, oh, just stop borrowing from other cultures. Period. You stay in your lane, I'll stay in my lane, and it's like symptomatic, right?
Yeah.
But I guess what else could you say, right? Let's fix centuries of racial imbalance.
Well, I'm sure like the people who we disagree with about appropriation would say both, right? Why not do both? Because like one solution is much quicker and more immediate than the other,
Yeah, but then it's like, I feel like every time I see the extreme of an opinion, some Twitter troll or some like, far to the extreme opinion, but it's always stuff like, don't be eating this kind of food, don't be like watching this kind of movie, don't be dancing this kind of dance, don't be wearing this kind of thing, like don't be having your hair a certain way, right? And then, like obviously if we take the whole like don't participate in other people's cultures at all, other people become alien, and it's easy to dehumanize other people, right?
Yeah.
I feel like it's a much safer take. Like I have my best buddy growing up, his dad was super into Chinese culture, Chinese stuff all over his house, right? He like swords and stuff. He did kung fu. Every time I came over, he'd make Chinese stir fry, right? Like not super great stir fry, got better, but like, and you know, I was really into Asian culture, right? But like, imagine what it would have done when I've been like, no, you're not doing the stir fry. You are appropriating my stir fry. You're appropriating my wall decorations and shit. You know, like I don't know. It just creates such a separation.
Yeah.
Where,
But
where
like, yeah, I mean, the difference is like this one guy being super into Asian culture, he's not like really profiting off of it or doing anything to, you know, redefine it in the greater world, right? But
Yeah.
Elvis taking a black song and redefining it as his own is, I mean, that has a huge impact, right? And that changes the perception of rock music for millions of people. So
Yeah. No, I mean, I thought the key word in Justin's previous statement was just inequality, like the latent inequality between the white man and the black man. And, you know, I mean, let's say, imagine Alan's story. Let's say his friend's dad was really into slave culture, right? And he like, I don't know.
slave culture,
But, I mean,
like 200 years ago, he's like, yo, those songs they were rocking around the campfire, let's go.
or like, right? Like, I mean, the whole Elvis example, I feel like is about like a white man profiting off of black culture, right? When historically the white man has taken advantage of the black of you know, black people. So it's I think it's, I guess that leaves a bad taste in people's mouth, and you know, why this becomes a difficult question. But yeah, of course, we do need to be mindful of the fact that, you know, cultural mixing and cultural sharing is a very productive thing, right? That can lead to beautiful music. You know.
But that's the thing, right? Can we not share cultures? Can, like, let's say, can white people not take part in any culture besides their own until we are all perfectly equal, whatever that arbitrary standard is? Or can they get there when we're like 90% equal, 99%?
I mean, that generates an even more basic question, which is, what is white culture, right? Like, I feel like in America, like this country with like having, you know, so many immigrants for so long, like what we consider white culture includes things like Taco Bell and Panda Express, which are derivative, right?
And pizza.
Yeah.
Like
and
Italian
pizza,
people used to not be white, you know?
Yeah.
Jewish people used to not be white. I don't know if they still are. Are they?
Yeah, like it's not like we're all here eating like English continental breakfasts every day, and that's white culture, and we're gonna stick to it. You know, like American culture, inseparable from, you know, all the immigrants who make it up, right? So I don't know. You're never gonna get to that. You're never gonna be able to reduce it down to that.
Yeah, and I feel like this has to do with kind of, to your point about inequality. I hadn't thought about it that way before, but kind of as I internalize that a little bit more, I feel like this is consistent with a related theme I've I actually see a lot on mainland Chinese television dramas that they produce. And bear with me here. It's the theme is this idea of how do I put this? The diaspora, if I'm saying that word correctly, of a nation, they critically depend on the strength of their home nation to kind of hold their heads high kind of abroad, right? So the kind of why that came across in those Chinese television dramas is kind of the communists, like their consistent claim to kind of their legitimacy is, we're making China strong, so you folks can kind of walk the world with your heads held high, knowing that you come from a strong country, strong culture, right? So I wouldn't say that, you know, during this age of China is the number one, the strongest culture, but it can stand alone, right? There isn't that feeling of minority per se, right? So I think that really relates to your point about kind of the people who are most sensitive to this issue of cultural appropriation are probably those people who they feel like their culture can very easily be marginalized. They're not really self-sufficient. And if they were cast in a light that was not detrimental to their reputation or their culture, right? That could persist and become a majority view, and that in some ways is threatening, especially towards minority cultures, right? So like, because I'll just draw a contrast, right? That example Alan brought up about the red people, right? The Native American cultures at this day and age is very marginalized and it's almost non-existent, right? Very small pockets exist here and there, right? But they also did very, I guess objectionable things to like the whole Asians with their small eyes and like, in those older movies, right? Like like I I'm struggling to describe very specific stereotypes, but and let me know if you disagree on this general notion that like people will kind of cast in a poor light. But I feel like, at least in my interaction with Chinese folks who see those movies, they just be like, we're not like that. I don't know why you're doing it this way. You're just wrong. But it doesn't get to that level of angst where it's kind of, oh, they're destroying my culture. No, it's just kind of like, well, I mean, that's just a bad characterization.
Well, yeah, I think it's like to your point of like how much is it threatening me or my culture? And like when Asian people do it, we're like at worst people make fun of us more in school or they make fun of our kids, right? But I guess to the black community, like a negative, like they're almost like at odds constantly with like a justice system and a police system that's like weighed against them, and extra like extra negative perception could literally just result in more deaths, right? Whereas that's not really something we even consider with us, right?
Yeah.
Someone like we see Asians portrayed as gangsters or violent people on TV, and we're like, ha, I wish I was like that, right? But then if you're black and you constantly see that, you gotta wonder, like, A, like what do people think of me? B, does it like put me or my family more at danger?
Yeah.
Right? And like we might think of A, but never think of B.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Totally agree.
How did we get here from piano? Oh,
Well,
culture.
this is
That's
sort
right.
of on my agenda. Like when I asked the question originally, I had this is kind of a bullet point in my head that I wanted to get to. So yeah, I guess on that note, I thank you guys for entertaining my prompt. I thought it was very interesting. Yeah, we talked about piano lessons and cultural appropriation. But yeah, I'm going to stop the recording.